Hey, shalom, shalom from your Dutch Uncle John. Are you ready to rumble? No, you can't rumble without the letter resh. And today we're going to cover the 20th letter of the Hebrew alphabet, the letter resh. It's the R sound. Its ancient picture is a head. And the Hebrew word for head is rosh. So you can see how they are related. It has a gematria value of 200. Remember that Hebrew reads right to left. So here we have the head, the ancient Hebrew, pointing to the left. If you turn an alphabet around, now the head is pointing to the right. And you know what? It's not hard to see how that head became the letter R. And if you look at the English lowercase r, notice it is just the opposite direction of the Hebrew letter resh. Very nice. Not very original on the English designers. In the Torah, there are 18,109 reshes. Okay. And as we have a cursive version, okay, it looks very like the resh. And the resh is a dental, okay, because you use your teeth to make this sound, resh. Your teeth actually touch together as you push the air out through them. It has a Greek equivalent, which is the ro, all right? And resh is spelled resh, yod, shin. And as I said earlier, it's very closely associated with the Hebrew word for head, which is rosh, resh, aleph, shin. And I'm sure you've heard and maybe even used this word rosh before. There is a Jewish holiday called Rosh Hashanah. Shana is year. You put a hey in front of it. Hashanah is the year. And Rosh Hashanah is head of the year. It's the Jewish New Year. Usually takes place in September. The first place we see the word Rosh, it's kind of maybe hidden here, but in the very first word of the Bible, Bereshit. Notice the second, third, and fourth letters spell Rosh, which is head. And the three remaining letters is a bet, yod, tav, which is house, bet. And kind of interesting, it's kind of pointing out that in Bereshit you have the head of the house. And of course this is a direct reference to Yeshua, who is the head of the house. And the first word in the Torah that begins with a resh would be reshit, which is Bereshit minus the bet in front. Remember, this bet that's in front is a prefix, which means in, and then the word reshit means beginning or first fruits. So if you have Bereshit, it's in beginning. And there is no the. I know a lot of the English translations say in the beginning, but that's not how it is in the Hebrew. The first time now that's kind of a hidden first word there because it's part of Bereshit. But you also find it in Genesis 3:15. This is that proto-evangelium. Remember, Adam and Eve have eaten the fruit, and God is now dishing out the curses, and the snake is going to crawl on his belly and eat dust. And in Genesis 3:15, it says, "And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed, and he shall bruise you on the rosh, head, and you shall bruise him on the heel." This is maybe the first prophetic picture of a Messiah who's going to come and save the world. All right? it talks about in that verse that the Messiah, that's the seed of the woman, is going to crush the head of Satan, right? And Satan, he is only going to be able to attack back from behind by hitting the heel of the it's the seed of the serpent who's going to attack the seed of the woman, Messiah, from behind and injure him by injuring or bruising his heel. And we know Yeshua did have his heel bruised. They put nails through it when they nailed him to the cross. But just like Satan, right? Sneaky cowardice, biting from behind. Yeah. Okay. We've talked about in the past videos that some letters in the Torah are enlarged and some letters in the Torah are very small. And resh is no exception. Here's the list of different enlarged or diminished letters. And we have in, what is it, Exodus 34:14. We have an enlarged resh. And by the way, just let me point out that the letter resh is not the letter dalet. The resh, you can see, has a nice curve to it. The dalet is perpendicular, and it even has a little overhang off to the right side. The dalet represents door. Okay, so don't get those two confused, which many do. But Exodus 34:14 says, "For you shall worship no other God, for Yahweh, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God." Okay, so where in that verse it says, "You shall worship no other"? That word other is echar. Aleph, chet, resh. Why is there an enlarged resh there? The reason is so you do not confuse it with a dalet. Because if you put a dalet there, it's the word echad, which is the word for one. And what God doesn't want is to read this verse that says, "For you shall worship no one God." That is completely anathema to God's plan. He is a jealous God, and he wants all praise and glory and worship, right? So he enlarges the resh, so you know that you're saying you shall worship no other God. He does the same thing. Here's a list of more majuscule and minuscule letters, and look at Deuteronomy 6:4. This is the famous Shema, right? It has an enlarged dalet in it. And the Shema, remember, is Shema Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. He puts an enlarged dalet there so that you don't confuse it with a resh. Okay? And let's look at these. We can see it in the first word also has an enlarged ayin. The word Shema, if you tried to spell it just by sounding it out, you have shin, and there's a mem, and you might be tempted to put an aleph there, Shema. But if you do, it becomes the word maybe or perhaps. So you don't put an aleph, he put a very large ayin, which is the word hear, Shema. We have Jacob's son is Simeon. Shimeon, it's hear, because his mother said, God has heard my prayer, so he has given me a son, and I'm going to name him Shimeon, for hearing, because God heard her prayers. Okay, by the way, that word Shema, it doesn't just mean hear. In Hebrew, it's deeper. It says, hear and obey. Okay? That's important. Hear and obey. Keep that in mind whenever you're reading New Testament verses when Jesus says, he who has an ear, let him shema. It's not just let him hear. Jesus is saying let him hear and obey. Everybody has ears. He don't want you just to listen and hear. He wants you to hear and obey. So keep that in mind. So God, he puts here a giant ayin so that you don't accidentally try to spell it from the audible, shin mem aleph, as in maybe. Like maybe, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. He don't want that to happen, okay? And at the end of the verse, he has the word echad, aleph, chet, dalet. And he doesn't want you making the mistake of thinking that it is spelled, or that when you see it, that dalet is a resh. So echad is aleph, chet, dalet. He doesn't want you to confuse it with a resh because that spells echar, another. And it would then say, if you mixed up both of these letters, you'd be getting, oh, maybe, perhaps, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is another. No, he wants you to realize, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, echad. So he puts a giant dalet. It's kind of like the one we just saw about the jealous God. He doesn't want you confusing the resh and the dalet for another versus one. Very nice. And while we're on the dalet here, the word dal in Hebrew is poor. Okay, it's a dalet lamed. Mark 14:7 in the Brit Hadashah, New Testament says, for you have the poor with you always. Okay, there's the word poor. All right. And you can see that the dalet looks like a poor man. He's bent over. He has his hands sticking out the back. Remember, the dalet has that little piece that sticks out, perpendicular. So the dalet, he's got his hand out looking for alms, looking for donations, but he's facing forward and he doesn't see who's giving him the donations. Okay? That's how we are to give, anonymously. That's the picture that I see here, okay? And if the dalet represents a poor man, the resh represents a destitute man, okay? He has nothing. And we have examples of that. In 1 Samuel 18:23, it says, so Saul's servants spoke these words to David, but David said, is it trivial in your sight to become the king's son-in-law, since I am only a poor man and insignificant? That word poor, destitute, is rush. It's a resh and a shin. And you see it there in the Hebrew. We also see it in 2 Samuel 12, 1 through 3. Then Yahweh sent Nathan to David, and he came to him and said, there were two men in a city, one wealthy and the other poor, rush, destitute. The wealthy man had a great many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing at all except one little ewe lamb, which he brought and nurtured, and it grew up together with him and his children. It would eat scraps from him and drink from his cup and lie in his lap and was like a daughter to him. This is when, remember David, great king, but he had his downfall with Bathsheba. And he sent for Bathsheba's husband and sent him back to the front lines with instructions to put him on the front line so he'd be killed. So now Bathsheba would be a widow and he could have her. And Nathan the prophet figured it out, and he came to David with this kind of story of the poor man who lost his little sheep. That's all he had, was one precious little ewe lamb, and it was taken from him. Deuteronomy 1:21 says, "See, Yahweh your Elohim has placed the land before you. Go up, take possession, just as Yahweh, the Elohim of your fathers, has spoken to you. Do not fear or be dismayed." So this word rosh here, you see, resh, shin, can also represent inheritance or possession. We see it in Genesis 27:37. But Isaac replied to Esau, "Behold, I have made him your master, and I have given to him all his relatives as servants. And with grain and new wine I have sustained him. What then can I do for you, my son?" This is when Esau comes in to get the blessing, but it had already been given to Jacob, and Isaac poured everything he had into the blessing for Jacob, thinking it was Esau. Remember, Jacob put the fur on his arm and wore Esau's coat, so he smelled and felt like his brother Esau, and he got the blessing. But this word for new wine is terosh. It's a tav, yod, resh, shin. And what he is giving here, this new wine, is representing an inheritance or possession. Terosh, new wine, represents the inheritance. He also gave him servants and grain, which represented servants, obadim, and a multiplying wealth in the grain. Okay, let's look at some words that begin with the letter resh. In Genesis 1:2, it says, "The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God, was hovering over the face of the waters." The word Ruach is spirit, resh, vav, chet. All right? And that same word, the same three letters, also means wind. Exodus 10:19, "And Yahweh turned a very strong west wind, ruach, which took the locusts away and blew them into the Red Sea. There remained not one locust in all the territory of Egypt." Interesting that the word spirit and the word wind are the same in Hebrew. You know, the spirit is something you can't see, but you can feel it. You know it's there. The same with wind. You can't see it, but you know it's there. You feel it. In Isaiah 52:7, one of my favorite verses, "How beautiful upon the mountains are the feet of him who bring good news, who proclaims peace, who brings glad tidings of good things, who proclaims salvation, who says to Zion, your Elohim reigns." The word foot and feet, foot is regel, resh, gimel, lamed. So the word foot begins with a resh. There are many names in the Bible that begin with resh. We'll give you a little test here and see which ones you can figure out. Here's the first one. It's a resh, bet, kuf, hey.
Anyone? Anyone? Bueller?
This is Rivka. Who is Rivka? You'll find her in Genesis 22:23. This is the wife of Yitzhak, Isaac, Rebecca. Very nice. In Genesis 35:10, it does say, "And Elohim said to him," to Jacob, "Your name is Yaakov, Jacob. Your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel shall be your name." So he called his name Israel. You know, it's interesting. Jacob gets his name changed to Israel. Look at Jacob's family. His father was Yitzhak. His grandmother is Sarah. His mother was Rebecca. His grandfather is Abraham. And Leah is his first wife. And the initials of those 5 family members spell Israel. So that's how Israel came about. Israel also means he is a prince of El. Yud is he, Sar is prince, and El is Elohim, God. Nice. Very nice. Okay, here's another one. Resh, Chet, Lamed. Rachel. In Genesis 29:11, and Jacob kissed Rachel, Rachel, and lifted up his voice and wept. Notice her name is not Rachel, it's Rachel. It's a chet in there, okay, which is the hard K sound. We in the English-speaking world often call her Rachel, but it's not. Another one, Resh, Aleph, Vav, Bet, final noon. This is Reuben. Genesis 29:32. And Leah conceived and gave birth to a son, and she named him Reuben, for she said, Yahweh has seen my affliction, surely my husband will love me now. Reuben, Ben is son, and Ru is behold. So when she has this baby, it's a boy, behold a son, Reuben, and that's what they named him. All right, here's another one, Resh, Pei, Aleph. This was a good one if you are not feeling well. This is the word Rapha. Rapha means to heal. Okay? And Exodus 15:26 says, For I am Yahweh who heals you. I am Yahweh Rapheka. And this is a good one. If you're not feeling well, if you got some sickness, some disease, whatever, and you're praying for healing, this is one of God's names, Yahweh Rapha, the Lord our healer. And if you address your prayers to him as Yahweh Rapha, let me tell you, that gets his ear. Okay? Not that he's not listening otherwise, but if you're praying for healing, that's the way I would address him. And maybe you've heard the name Raphael, famous artist, and we have people today named Raphael. Okay, isn't there a turtle named Raphael? Yeah, one of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I think is Raphael. Anyway, Raphael. Rapha is healer, and El is Elohim. So Raphael means the Lord our healer. You can address your prayer, Raphael. Another one here is Resh, Chet, Bet. Rahab. In Joshua 2:1, so they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. Rachav in the Hebrew. Remember, they sent the spies into the promised land, and they were taken in and hidden by Rahab. Very nice. Resh, Vav, Tav. This is Ruth. In Ruth 1:4, in the name of the other, Ruth. These were the wives of the children of Naomi and Elimelech. And one of them married Ruth, and one of them married Orpah. Okay, here's a big word. What's this one? Whoa, my goodness. Let's see. We got, it starts with a resh, so I say R. And then there's an aleph. I say R-A. Then a gimel. R-A-G. R-A-G-G. R-A-G-G. Mem, Vav, Pe, Pe, Ragmop. 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 Okay. Let's go to Genesis 1:3. The word or is Aleph Vav Resh. And that's the word for light. We see it in Genesis 1:3. Vayomer Elohim, Yehi Or, Vayi Or. And God said, "Be light," and light was. So Adam and Eve, when they were first created, they were naked. And they didn't realize or know or care that they were naked. They were clothed in God's light. But after they sinned and took a bite of the fruit, it says, then, and this is after God passed out all of the curses to the snake and to the woman and to the ground. In Genesis 3:21, it says, "And Yahweh Elohim made garments of skin for Adam and his wife and clothed them." So after the curses, now they're clothed in skin. And this picture is they were clothed in light, now they're clothed in skin. Where does God get skin? He had to sacrifice an animal, right? And this is the first sacrifice. It says, without the shedding of blood, there is no remission of sin. That word for skin is also or, but it's spelled differently. It's ayin vav resh, or skin. Interesting. At the beginning you have, God said, "Be light," be or, and at the beginning, whenever he made Adam and Eve, remember they were naked to begin with. And they remained naked until they ate the fruit, and then all of a sudden they realized that they were naked and they were ashamed. And so God then clothed them in or, skin. What were they clothed in prior to this? They weren't clothed, I guess they were clothed in or, light, the light of God. And then, once they were ashamed, and God made them new garments of or. Very nice. Okay. And notice those two words, how they're spelled. We said light was aleph vav resh, and skin is ayin vav resh. The only difference is the first letter. Aleph begins with 1, gematria, and ayin is a 70. If you put in the gematria values, light adds up to 207, skin, or, adds up to 276. And if you take the difference, they were clothed in light, and now they're clothed in skin. The difference is 69, okay? And how do you get 69 in gematria? It's a samek and a tet. And samek, remember, means to support or to lean on. And tet is a coiled snake. So Hava, Eve, she supported the serpent. And they went from clothed in light to clothed in skin. By the way, that being clothed in skin, where did God get the skin? You know, I talked to my Hebrew friend, my Jewish friend, and he says, you ready for this? Prior to God clothing them in skin, they were like just beings that they were spiritual beings. And then once they fell and God made garments of skin for them, he made them into bodies. I don't think that's what happened. I don't think they were some kind of spiritual beings that then were given bodies. I think they were given bodies to begin with that were naked, and then God had to sacrifice an animal. Remember, without the shedding of blood, there's no remission of sins. And so God is starting that whole picture of it takes blood to cover sin. And they had sinned, they disobeyed, and now he's sacrificing an animal and giving them the hides. Okay, interesting. Okay, what else we got? How about Exodus 3:14? This is the Pi verse, 3.14. And Elohim said to Moshe, I am who I am. And he said, this is what you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. God also told Moshe, tell the Israelites, Yahweh, the Elohim of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, sent me to you. This is my name forever, and this is how I am to be remembered from generation to generation. That phrase, this is, by the way, when Moses goes up and sees the burning bush, and he says they're going to ask, what is your name? What do I tell them? And this is God's answer to that question. And that phrase, from generation to generation, is lador dor. Okay, so the word for generation is dor. Keep that in mind. And notice the order, because that word generation, dor, is a dalet and a resh, two letters that can easily be confused. Okay? But this word generation, it begins with a dalet and then ends with a resh. And then you get generations, right? Generation. If you switch those two letters and do resh dalet, this is the word raid. And raid means decline, which I could see is the opposite of generations. You're either progressing and creating new generations, or you're in decline. Okay? Interesting. If you take the word and reverse it, it means the opposite. How clever is that? I have other examples of that. We'll try to stick in some other videos in the future. We see this many times, this resh dalet order, meaning decline. Look at Exodus 19:25. So Moshe went down to the people and told them. Moshe went down. That word going down is vayered. The vav in front is and then yered is to go down or decline. You see, yod, resh, dalet. Okay? In Jonah, chapter 1, verse 1 and 2, the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry against it, for their wickedness has come up before me. But Jonah rose up to flee to Tarshish from the presence of Yahweh. So he went down to Joppa, found a ship that was going to Tarshish, paid the fare, and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish from the presence of Yahweh. That word, yerad, is yered, to go down. He went down to Joppa, and he went down into the ship. And in Jonah 1, verse 4, the Lord hurled a great wind on the sea, and there was a great storm on the sea, so that the ship was about to break up. Then the sailors became afraid, and every man cried to his God, and they hurled cargo, which was in the ship, into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the hold of the ship, lain down and fallen asleep. The word asleep, well, here you see gone down again, and then now the word asleep. You go down into sleep, and you can look here, that word, it's all one word. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 words in one, and it's vayeradam. Vayeradam. The vav in front is and, the yod is he, and then the rod, the resh dalet, is down, and then the mem. So that vayeradam means, and he was fast asleep. Wow. Lots in that. Lots of letters they mix together and make incredible things in Hebrew, don't they? But there you can see, yeah, very nice. Okay, radam is sleep. Joshua 24:11. Then you went over the Jordan and came to Jericho, and the men of Jericho fought against you. Also the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites. But I delivered them into your hand. And they went across the Jordan. The word Jordan, the river that separates Israel from the country of Jordan, is Jordan. And notice its spelling. Yod, Resh, Dalet, final noon. And why? What does the river do? The river flows down. And so it has that Resh Dalet, declining 2 letters in it. Very nice. So we have, look at the order of God. Okay, if you put Dalet Resh, you get generations. If you put Resh Dalet, it's declining. Okay? By the way, those 2 letters, Dalet and Resh, there are words that represent those 2 letters. And the Dalet, a word that represents Dalet is din, which means judgment. Okay? The word Dan, that was one of the sons, right, of Jacob, means judge. Dinah is woman, female judge, has the hay on the end. Okay? We see it in Job 36:17. But you are filled with the judgment, do the wicked. Judgment and justice take hold of you. There you see it twice. Din, judgment. Okay? And it begins with a Dalet. And the Resh begins the word Raham, which is the word for mercy or compassion. We see it in Exodus 33:18. Then Moses said, please, show me your glory. And he said, I will cause all my goodness to pass before you, and I will proclaim my name, Yahweh, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. That word there, compassion, is Raham. So those 2 things are opposite, aren't they? You either have judgment or you have mercy. Very nice. And it's those 2 letters begin those 2 words. They're opposites. Okay? Remember the burning bush we mentioned a little while ago. Exodus 3:2. There the angel of Yahweh appeared to him in a blazing fire from within a bush. And Moses saw the bush ablaze with fire, but it was not consumed. So that burning bush, this is when Moses goes up on Mount Sinai, right? By the way, that word Sinai, okay, is a Samek, Nun, Hey. If you write that word backwards, Hey, Nun, Samek, you get the word for the miracle. And that is a pretty big miracle, that a bush is on fire, but it is not consumed. Interesting, okay? And notice, in this verse, you have those 2 things. You have judgment, right? There appeared to him in a blazing fire from within the bush. Moses saw the bush ablaze with fire. Fire, judgment, judgment. But it was not consumed. Mercy, Raham. Very beautiful, those 2 things. And that's a beautiful picture of God. God is judgment. He has to punish sin, but he's also merciful, and he doesn't want to punish you. Okay? So how does he get around that? If he's a perfect God, then he's a perfect judge. And he must punish. But he's merciful. He doesn't want to punish, but he must punish. But he doesn't want to punish. He loves you. He has mercy. So how does he get around this? He leaves his throne. He comes to earth as a baby and grows up as a human, and he takes the punishment for you. That's the picture of Yeshua dying on the cross, a perfect, sinless, innocent man, human man, taking our punishment. God is God and man. The Messiah is God and man. Notice the word din. It begins with the Dalet, and the Dalet, listen, the Dalet is a very, we're going to say, hard letter. It begins with a hard D. Da, da, right? D. Versus Raham, Raham is a resh. A resh. It's a much softer letter. Okay? By the way, that word Raham, meaning compassion, look at Isaiah 49:15. Can a woman forget her nursing child and have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, but I will not forget you. Wow, God is never going to forget us. Can a woman forget her child, her baby that she's nursing? He says, maybe that could happen before I forget you. What are the chances of a woman forgetting her baby? Very slim. So the chances of God forgetting you are even slimmer. And in Genesis 29:31, it says, when Yahweh saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her Raham, but Rachel was barren. Rachem is womb. Interesting that the word Raham, and they're spelled the same. Raham, compassion, mercy, and the word Rachem, womb, spelled the same, just pronounced different. One means mercy, compassion, one means womb. And you talk about irony, you would think that a Rachem, a womb, should be the epitome of a place of compassion and mercy. A woman's womb is the safest, most perfect, just safest place for a baby. Unless you live in the world in the 19th, 20th century, where they're aborting children right and left. They don't like the sex of what it's going to be. They didn't like the father. They didn't like the boyfriend who got them pregnant. I mean, they're using abortion for birth control. Rachem is no longer the safe place it should be biblically. And back to these two words with the hard D, dalet, and the softer resh. You notice, if you want generations to continue, notice the order that these two letters are in. Dalet is a hard dalet, and then it's a softer resh. And you know what? If you're raising kids, if you're a school teacher, if you're doing anything with kids, you need to start with a hard dalet. Here are the rules. Be a disciplinarian. Be a little bit strict. And then, once you've established the rules, then you can soften it with a resh, a softer. Okay? And if you do that, generations will proceed. Versus, if you start with a soft resh, and then try to rein it in with a hard dalet. You ever have kids and you just let them go wild, and then once they've gone wild, try to rein them in with us hard rules, and you must, that's impossible, okay? And things will go in decline. Just even the pronunciation of the letters God has thought of, and he wove that into words. It's unbelievably beautiful, isn't it? So if you want your children to go in decline, be permissive. Let them do whatever they want. And then try to rein it in. Ain't going to happen. Okay? Very nice. Let's see. Lamentations 3:35. To turn aside the justice due a man before the face of the Most High. This is the word mishpat giver. This is the word for human rights. And it adds up to 634. And there's two other words that add up to 634. One of them is ladorot, which is for generations. And notice you have lamed, dalet, resh, tav. The dalet precedes the resh, and you get generations, and it adds up to 634. Or you can have la redet, which now you have the softer resh followed by the hard dalet, and that means to descend, which is also 634. So you have your choice how you want to raise or teach your children. Okay, another place we see the resh is in the phrase bashin kuf resh. And that's just a phrase, an idiom in Hebrew. And what they're doing is just naming three letters, shin, kuf, resh. Well, those three letters spell sheker. And the bet in front can be with sheker. Okay, what is sheker? Sheker is the word for lie or falsehood. You know, in English, if someone tells you a lie or something that's not true, you can say, you know, that is an L-I-E. You're stressing, you're spelling it out in capital letters. Okay, and in Hebrew, they do the same thing. That is bashin kuf resh. It's kind of dismissing somebody as telling you a falsehood. All right. And by the way, the letter resh, you know, the Hebrew Bible, the Torah, actually begins with 4 different letters. What? How can that be? Well, let's look at it. First of all, the Word of God, we know, is the Aleph Bet, from Aleph to Tav, right? The first and the last, which Jesus claimed to be. I am the first and the last. And those 2 letters, Aleph, Tav, spell et. We have whole videos on et. Hopefully you've seen that. But the ordinal beginning of God's Word is an Aleph. There's no question, we know that, okay? If you go by the meaning of words, remember the first word of the Torah, the first full word is reshit. It does have a prefix in front of it, the bet, but the meaning word is reshit, beginning. So it begins with a resh. The scriptural beginning of the Torah is a yod. Well, why is that? Because if you're going to script it, if you're going to write it, as soon as you put your pen down on paper, that first dot you make is a yod. So you cannot write the Torah without first making a yod, because yod is represented by a dot or a little, right? It's a teeny tiny little thing. And there's a fourth beginning. There's a phonetic beginning. The phonetic beginning is hey. You can't read the Torah without first taking a breath. When you inhale and the breath comes out. And what is hey? Hey is that letter that a Jewish person just can't define. It's God's, it's his breath. No, it's his essence. It's his blessing, revelation. You know, it's the breathing, okay? It's the breathing of the word. Very nice. So those 4 letters, by the way, are the 4 beginning letters of the Hebrew Bible. And if you put them together, they spell Aryeh. I don't know how to pronounce it, but it's the Hebrew word for lion. And so even those 4 letters that begin the Hebrew Bible, they point to Yeshua, who is the Lion of Judah, Lion of Yehuda. He's also, Yeshua is also the Word of God. How cool is that? Okay, look at Psalm 119. This is the long one with 176 verses. And remember the first 8 verses, they all begin with Aleph. And then the next 8 verses all begin with Bet, and the next 8 begin with Gimel. And if you jump all the way down to verse 153 through 160, all the verses begin with the letter Resh. Very nice. Okay. Thank you so much for watching. To God be the honor. To God be the glory. To God be the praise. And pass these on. Thank you. Okay, We will talk to you soon. God bless. Bye-bye. Wait! We have a bonus. We've talked about this 3 other times when we did the letter Pei, and when we talked about the letter Dalet, and when we talked about the letter Samek. And now we're talking about the letter Resh, and you put those 4 letters together, you get the word Pardes. Pardes is the Hebrew word for orchard. Okay? Interesting that in an orchard you have peri. Peri is fruit. And remember, in English, fruit is F-R-U-I-T. Remember, the pei can be an F sound or a P sound. So you have a pei is F, and then you have a resh, which is the R, and then you have a yod, which is the I. Those are 3 letters that we get. The letter fruit is in there, okay? So I believe the word fruit, if you check the etymology, it's going to go back to the Hebrew, from peri. At least the spelling here it does, right? Fruit, very nice. Orchard, Pardes, comes an orchard. Where do we think of when we think of an orchard? I think of the ultimate or original orchard would be Eden, right? Garden of Eden, where God made Adam and Eve and he put them in this paradise. Notice the word paradise. It's a P. Listen to the sounds of the letters. There's a P, and there's an R, and there's a D, and there's an S. Paradise comes from Pardes, orchard, which is like a garden. Okay? He planted trees there, it said. So the Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, is a paradise, Pardes. Very cool. We see it couple times, Nehemiah 2:8, in a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest. Here it's translated as forest. Ecclesiastes 2:5, I made myself gardens and parks. It's translated as parks. In the Song of Solomon 4:13, your branches are an orchard of pomegranates. There's the word Pardes, meaning orchard. So it all has this orchard, garden, park, forest theme. Okay? And those 4 letters that spell Pardes, they represent 4 ways of interpreting a particular scripture. Each letter has a meaning. The Pei represents the Peshat level. Peshat means the literal meaning. What does the verse say? That's what it means. Okay? Then you have the resh level, which is the remez. Remez is a hint or an allegory. Okay? So there's going to be something else that it's hinted at in that verse. Then you have the drosh level. The drosh level is the application. How do you apply that verse to your life? And then finally is the samek, the sod level. The sod is the Hebrew word for secret or mystery. So there's going to be some deeper things in that verse. Okay? And the scribes and the sages and the rabbis believe that any verse can be broken down into these 4 levels and you can be learning more and deeper things. So I thought I'd take a verse and let's show you the 4 levels. Let's start with a Peshat level. And for our scripture, I've chosen Genesis 42, verses 1 and 2. Verse 1 says, Now Jacob saw there was grain in Egypt, and Jacob said to his sons, Why are you staring at one another? Okay, remember there was, the brothers sold Joseph into slavery, and they took him to Egypt, and he interpreted Pharaoh's dream, became number 2 in all of Egypt. Pharaoh had a dream about there's going to be a famine, so Joseph suggested, let's store up grain. during the 7 good years, and then we'll have food for the 7 bad years. And Pharaoh made Joseph number 2. Well, this famine extended into Canaan, where Jacob and his 11 remaining sons were living, and daughter, Dinah, and his 2 wives. And so Jacob realizes there's grain down in Egypt. And he says to his sons there, "Why are you staring at one another? The solution is down in Egypt, down with," he didn't know that Joseph was still alive, but it's kind of ironic that he's saying the solution lies down in Egypt with that brother you have betrayed. That's very prophetic, because Yeshua Jesus is the brother that the Jews rejected, and he's the one who has and is the bread of life. This whole Jacob story and Joseph, that is, it's just parallel with Yeshua, right? The brothers betray their brother, and he's the one who ends up saving them. Beautiful picture. So in verse 2, then he said, "Look, I have heard that there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place, so that we may live and not die." Okay, so at the Peshat level, Jacob says, "Why are you looking at one another? The solution's down in Egypt. Go down there and buy some grain so that we can live and not die." That's the Peshat level. It's what it says is what it is. All right. Notice he does say, "Hey, go down there and buy some for us." That word "go down" is redu. And look at it. It's a resh, dalet, vav. There's the resh, dalet, raid, to decline, go down to Egypt. We've just talked about that, and here's an example worked into this passage. Now, the remez level. There's a hint of something else happening here. They did go down to buy the grain, and in Genesis 42:8, they're standing before their brother, and it says, "So Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him." Why didn't the brothers recognize Joseph? Well, 20 years had passed. He's now number 2 in all of Egypt, which they would never have expected. And he's become Egyptian. He's not Egyptian, he's still Hebrew, but he's dressed in Egyptian garb, and he's speaking Egyptian, and so they recognize, or he recognizes his brothers when they came for food, but they don't recognize him. It's kind of interesting. Look in Genesis 50, verse 19. Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive." This is after Joseph revealed himself to his brothers, okay, which Yeshua is going to do on his return, right? Very, very prophetic, very parallel. It's kind of, it's just beautiful how it all fits together. All right. Let's go to the drosh level. The drosh level is going to be an application, okay? Remember what Jacob said to those boys. He said, "Why are you looking at one another? The solution is down in Egypt." And I can see the boys say, "Okay, well, we need food. Well, maybe we could get, no, I don't know. What do you think? I don't know. Maybe we could." They're looking at one another for a solution. They're not looking at the brother they betrayed who's down in Egypt. And that application here to modern day, if you get into Jewish life, the Jews are looking for a Messiah. And they're looking at one another. Go way back to AD 135. You had a guy named Simon Bar Kokhba. He led the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Roman Empire. For 3 years, Bar Kokhba ruled as a prince of a semi-independent secessionist state in Israel. Some rabbis, including Rabbi Akiva, proclaimed Bar Kokhba as the Messiah. Unfortunately, he died during the rebels' last stand at the fortress of Betar. He's a very famous Jewish man who they put on the short list as Messiah. You can see modern day postage from Israel celebrating him. All right. Again, why are you looking at one another? The Jews today are looking at each other for their Messiah, not the brother they betrayed. Here's another one, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. He was born in 1902. He died in 1994. He's the 7th Rebbe of the Chabad Lubavitch. This guy, you'll see his picture. If you've been to Israel, it is plastered everywhere. This is the back of a road sign. I was waiting at a bus stop to take a bus to the airport, and this is the back of the sign. And notice there's 2 pictures of him. A newer one that's yellow, and then there's a faded one down below, and it looks like the yellow one is covering another faded one. And it has his picture, and it has writing below it, and it says, "Be the Messianic King." They think this man is the Messiah. And there's a huge following. They call them the Lubavitchers. Now, you understand, this man died in 1994, but they're still clinging. Well, he died spiritually or physically, but he's still alive spiritually. They make up all these excuses. You can go to a mall or in the airport or throughout Israel, and they will have little booths with Lubavitchers in there. Hey, come over here, it's almost like the Hare Krishnas used to have these little booths, and you would go over and they would summon you, and they would try to convert you into their thinking. That's what the Lubavitchers do, okay? And there are whole synagogues in America, throughout the world, that believe this guy is the Messiah, even though he's dead, okay? And here, following a series of strokes late in his life, many of his followers began to openly proclaim him as the Messiah. Most of the Chabad movement today has been taken over by Messiah Schneerson, including many of the rabbis. Some followers believe Schneerson never died. While Schneerson remained vague about such assertions, many of his followers do believe he was Messiah. FYI, he ain't the Messiah. Okay. But once again, why are you looking at one another? How about that brother you betrayed? Yeshua HaMashiach. Here's a very modern guy, Rabbi Shlomo Yehuda Berry. He's got a nickname, Yanuka. And there's a lot of stir about him. He shows up in a car, and there's just hundreds and thousands of people around. Apparently he's memorized the Torah, which puts him on the short list as Messiah. And again, why they're looking at one another for the Messiah, not the one that they betrayed, Yeshua. I would think the Messiah wouldn't wear glasses. I don't know. He's probably should be perfect, right? He should be. I've had a friend once. I helped him out. I'm not going to tell you what or how or who he was, but I did help him out in a time of need. And he was a Jewish fella, and he started calling me the Messiah. And I go, listen, I'm not the Messiah. I'm John the Baptist. I'm here to point to the Messiah, I would tell him. He didn't get that joke, being a New Testament reference. But one day he said, no, you are not the Messiah. And I said, well, what made you come to that conclusion? And it was some stupid little thing that I did, or, that I was, they got 10 million little rules that they follow, and if you happen to break one of them, then you can't be the Messiah. I mean, it's to the point, God prefers the right hand over the left hand. And so when the Messiah comes, he will put his left shoe on first and then the right shoe, or maybe vice versa. I don't know. Maybe the right shoe should be first, because the right is the good, and then the left shoe. And if you happen to put the left shoe on first and then the right shoe, that disqualifies you. You're not the Messiah, because you would have known better and you would have put the right shoe on first. I mean, it's so ridiculous, all their tiny little rules and requirements and how they can dismiss somebody. Well, I got dismissed because I did something stupid and little and he claimed was against the Torah. All right. So, I think if this guy's wearing glasses, Rabbi Barry, he probably wouldn't be the Messiah. What do I know? All right. And now the final level is the sod, the mystery level, right? The secret level. And let's see what we have in here. Look in Genesis 42:2. Then he said, look, I've heard there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us from that place, so that we may live and not die. The word we said earlier, redu, is to go down. Redu is a resh, dalet, vav. 200, 4, and 6 adds up to 210. Okay, that's nice. 210, by the way, is 21 times 10. That's, what, 3 times 7 times 3 plus 7. I got my 3s and 7s there. That's nice. And he's wanting to go down to Egypt, okay? And remember, when the Jews, they were down in Egypt and with Joseph, and then years passed and a new Pharaoh came who didn't know Joseph, and he was worried that the Jews were going to conquer the Egyptians, so he enslaved the Jews, right? And it was prophesied that they would be enslaved. In Genesis 15:13, it says, then he, God, said to Abram, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. So, it is prophesied that the Jews are going to be afflicted 400 years. Well, when they went down to Egypt, they were not enslaved for 400 years, okay? And not all of those years, some of the years they were in their own lands, some in other lands, in the Egypt land. Some of the years they served the Egyptians, some of those years they didn't. But they weren't enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. So why did it prophesy 400 years? Well, maybe, I think certainly, when did this prophecy begin? If you begin the prophecy at the birth of Isaac, because Isaac, he would be a descendant, right? He's Abraham's son, and he would be a stranger in a land that is not theirs. The promised land is not given to them until they return from Egypt. Then it's the promised land. So Isaac qualifies as a stranger in a land that is not his. Okay? So maybe the affliction starts right there, 400 years. And we know that Isaac was 60 years old whenever Jacob was born. And how do we know he was 60 years old? Genesis 25:26. And afterward his brother came out, and his hand took hold of Esau's heel. So his name was called Yaakov. Isaac was 60 years old when she bore him. Okay? And then Jacob, he was 130 years old when he went down to Egypt. How do we know that? Genesis 47, starting in verse 8. Pharaoh said to Jacob, "How old are you?" And Yaakov said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years." Okay, so now we got 190 years, and we've got to get 400 years of being strangers in a land that is not theirs. And so if you subtract 400 minus the 190, you get 210 years down in Egypt. All right? Well, 210, that's the gematria value of redu when Jacob told, go down to Egypt and get the grain. So in that word redu is a prophetic number of the years that they're going to be down in Egypt. How cool is that? All right. Thanks for watching. There's your bonus. God bless. Bye-bye.